So the third variable you can use to your advantage with the arm structure to get you to shallow the club better is pronation of the lead arm. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a little bit more how the forearms are turning in the golf swing. So the scientific terms would be either pronation of the lead arm, so the lead arm would be my left arm for me as a right-hander, and pronation would mean rolling it to my right. So you can see how if I just stab the club up vertically and I add that forearm rotation, the club starts to shallow out. Or you can even say supination of the trail arm. So for me, as a right-hander, again, that would be my right arm also rolling to the right. So as a right-handed player, we are talking about adding forearm roll to our right side. So you can see how when I do this, that shallows the club. Now, unfortunately, it's not that simple. We have to get into a little more detail on the specifics of it. First things first. Forearm rotation, I want to clarify for everybody, is not necessarily a bad thing in the golf swing. A lot of golfers have this idea that the second they hear, oh my God, you're rolling the forearms, that it's like the worst thing in golf, because a lot of high handicappers or golfers in general typically do it really early in the takeaway. So if I'm standing here in my takeaway, the first move I do is I roll my forearms to the right for a right-handed player. That's going to get the club very flat, very far to the inside. Oftentimes the club face gets wide open. You can see the toe of my club head here pointing up and back. That face angle is wide open. So depending on when it's done, it can certainly be problematic. So if you do it really early in the takeaway, as we've been over on social media, and as I'm sure many of you have seen videos on the internet somewhere, rolling the club very far to the inside really early with the forearms is problematic. And you can see here, the palm of my glove hand is facing the floor right now. The palm of my trail hand is facing up to the sky. That's my forearms that have rotated. Now, that obviously is a problem. But if you time up when you're going to do that forearm rotation, it could be used to your advantage. Meaning, if a golfer does it early in the takeaway, obviously that's problematic. But if a golfer does it in transition to the downswing, guess what? All of a sudden, the club starts to shallow out, right? If I roll my forearms closed, meaning as a right-handed player, if I roll my forearms to my left in the downswing, which unfortunately we see a lot of golfers doing, that is actually going to steepen the club, right? So it's not even about my elbow at this point, or the shoulder rotation, or the wrist angles. If I simply take my forearms and I rotate them to my left at the start of the downswing, no matter where the shaft is, it is going to start to steepen on me. See that? But if I do the opposite, and in transition, I'm rolling my forearms to my right, that is actually going to help me shallow the club. You can see the shaft angle is getting more shallow and horizontal. The club head is dropping way inside my hand path in the downswing. All of a sudden, I learned to shallow the club through the forearms. Now, it's not as simple as that. There's a lot of things in play here. One of the variables that tends to get affected when we rotate our forearms in that type of method is the club face is going to start to gradually open as it's happening. Meaning you might need to look at the club face and find elements within the golf swing, the grip, the wrist angles, or whatever, to make sure that the club face is not getting too open in the downswing if you use this specific movement to your advantage. And some golfers only have this movement that they can use to their advantage, and we'll get into that again when we dive into more scenario-based explanations. So if a golfer is rolling their forearms to the right, well, the face angle gets more open. Just like if my face angle is square in my setup and I create that forearm rotation, right, I'm rolling my forearms to my right as a right-hander, so I'm adding pronation of my lead arm here. Well, if I do that really early, the shaft gets into a shallow spot, right, which it would do the same thing in transition. It would get into that shallow spot, but the face angle got open when I did it in the takeaway. It would be no different at the top of the swing. If you did it in transition, well, all of a sudden, the shaft angle starts to shallow out for the player, but the face angle gets wide open. So in that type of scenario there, what needs to happen is the golfer either needs to make sure that the club face is more close at the top of the swing so that when they do that it doesn't get too open, or they would have to simultaneously, either as they're adding the forearm rotation to shallow the club, would need to feel the wrist also moving into flexion at the same time. So they would almost have to simultaneously do both. And in that scenario there, all of a sudden the shaft shallows out and the face doesn't get wide open. Because I can show you this example here, right? I'll actually put the face angle super shut here, right? It's obviously very closed. And let's put me at the top of the backswing where the shaft, let's say, is upright and the face angle is super closed. Well, if I add forearm rotation, so again, I'm going to clarify, that just means rolling my forearms in this direction, the palm of my glove hand pointing to the floor, or you can think the palm of the trail hand pointing to the sky, so I'm rolling my forearms open to my trail side. Well, if the face angle is shut here and the shaft is standing up and I add that forearm rotation, well, I'm going to shallow the club. But guess what? The face angle is going to get open. Take a look. The face angle is shut. At the top of the backswing, the face angle is very closed, right? Well, if I just add forearm rotation and no other variable changes, I'm shallowing the club. But is this club face shut? No, right? It's obviously getting a little more open. And so adding that forearm rotation, which some golfers have no choice, that's the only element they can use to their advantage based on their golf swing, which we will dive into. Well, you could do that to shallow the club better, but you either have to make sure that the face angle is more closed at the top of the backswing to match it up, or while you're adding that forearm rotation, you would need to feel the lead wrist, so the glove hand's wrist angle, move into more flexion, meaning more of a bowed position, because bowing the wrist will close the club face. This method, right? Extending the wrist tends to open the club face, bowing the wrist tends to close it. And so you might need to simultaneously feel like you're adding flexion to the wrist as you are adding that forearm rotation. All of a sudden, guess what? The face angle is no longer open, even though you've shallowed the club really well, and you can use that to your advantage. And so in the next few videos, we are going to dive into a lot more scenario-based explanations, understanding what the backswing not necessarily needs to look like, but understanding how to analyze the backswing and how you can use the backswing to decipher exactly which element, which drill, which piece you could use to your advantage to shallow the club. Because the answer is different for everyone. Too many golfers have this idea of, hey, I saw a YouTube video of, I can shallow the club if I do this. Well, not necessarily. You could if your variables are exactly aligned in a specific way at the top of the backswing, all the matchup of them, but you might not be able to. You might need to use a different element to your advantage. So we're going to dive into those scenarios so that by the end of this entire series, nobody has any doubt that they need to do exactly what I'm explaining, using the exact drills I'm explaining, depending on the matchup of the variables at the top of the backswing, which we're going to get into.